Hello and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Burn. I'm your host, Eric Miller. Today, joined by an awesome progressive with an awesome last name from the great state of Oregon, Carina Miller. How you doing, Carina?
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking some time to chat with me about your race. You're frozen now. Hopefully, you'll catch up. But you're running in Oregon's State Senate District 30. And I want to profile the district a little bit, but just a little bit about your background. Are you still there? Oh, you're frozen. Hello, are you there?
All right,
Oh,
can you hear me now?
There we go. I got a second version of you, so let me remove that one of
Sorry
you.
about that.
All right, cool. No worries. No worries. I was just going on about how awesome your last name was while you were offline. So I want to start with your background. Basically, your professional experience. I know you've been an advocate for a long time. You live on the Warm Springs reservation. Can you talk about, I guess your background, your maybe even your family heritage in the district, and what inspired you to run?
Yeah, so I am. Are you hearing echo?
No, it sounds all right.
Okay. So I'm actually a member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and that is a tribe in Oregon. There are 9 federally recognized tribes. Warm Springs signed a treaty in 1855, and we're one of 2 treaty tribes that exist in Oregon, which means that we were never terminated and had executive orders that restored us. And so that also means a very rich political history here in the state of Oregon and in the nation. So my background is really, backing up to the beginning. Growing up on a reservation in Central Oregon, when I was younger, I was really involved in grassroots activism. And so things like the American Indian movement, the civil rights movement, looking at people like that, that's really what inspired me to get involved in organizing. And it was those kinds of understanding of seeing kind of systemic issues that disproportionately impact people of color and people who live in poverty. And there's kind of these, norms of conservative views where I grew up. And so for somebody like me, who's very outspoken, who will call racism, who will always talk about problematic things, it was always viewed as like I'm creating problems or I'm talking about racism. And to be honest, growing up in a very conservative district, it was hard to get people to acknowledge racism was real. So all of that being said, the way that I've entered politics was really from a place of survival and not really of choices. Being an Indigenous woman, you look at missing and murdered Indigenous women, you look at literally across the board, the violence against our people and the genocide that very clearly was intended upon Native people by this country. And you can still see it in black and white in a lot of law. All of those reasons are why I went into politics, because the choices are either you have to be the best you can be and learn how to advocate on every level and not just be a good leader, but be a revolutionary leader that is simultaneously unraveling and dismantling systems as you're going up through them, or accept things the way they are and let your people suffer. So those were really, it's hard because it's not a choice for me to be involved in this political world, because the other piece of it is that I was raised here on the reservation, and I do have a very loving family that taught me a lot of tradition. And so now when we're talking about Indigenous ways of living and leading, I can break that down more specifically based off of the lessons and values that my grandmothers and grandparents and parents taught me, and then things from our spirituality and just our life systems that actually align with modern things like climate change, or looking at capitalism and how destructive it is to the environment. Or, when we really look at things like our criminal reform system, what are we doing? And these things can tie back to our relationships in my Indigenous culture. And so, all of those things combined of recognizing that I come from a place where we need strong advocates and we need leaders who are going to undo a lot of this societal gaslighting that our current representatives have, carried out with the way they misrepresent bills, the way they vote against our best interest and keep people in this district distracted from things that are actually impacting us. And then talk about real issues that make us a community, not just the oh, let's all be neighbors, but let's talk about when is it that we stop being teammates or classmates or friends and we start being racist? At
Hmm.
what point, because the high school I went to is 1/3 Mexican, 1/3 Native, and 1/3 white. And all of a sudden, somewhere in there, we are in separate parties. And it's like, when are we going to have these conversations? When are we going to have school boards and county commissioners and state representatives and senators? You don't have to convince that these things are real, but are actually going to go in ready to address them. So that's really the background of why and really, when I came home, so I went to the University of Oregon. I got a degree in ethnic studies. That is very important. I came home. I worked at our Children's Protective Services for a while. Then I went up to the Umatilla tribe and worked at their Head Start. Eventually, I came back home and was elected onto our tribal councils. I served a term for 3 years and worked on a variety of issues. And this is really where I started to see the need for strong leadership just in the entire district, whether it be broadband, obviously, as you can see, there are still issues here, actual infrastructure, public transportation, childcare access, healthcare, like literally everything. Our representatives are not advocating for us, and this district is the biggest and it's being hit the hardest. So I decided to run.
Right on, amazing. So this is it's Oregon's 30th. It's the largest district in the state. I was going to ask about the roles or the sort of the footprint of the tribe within that district and what institutional racism looks like. It's funny because I'm a white dude and all that stuff is baked in. Like I have privilege and whatnot, and when I hear institutional racism, I have to actively think of various groups that affects, right? It's not it's not my day-to-day life lived experience, right? And a lot of people think of institutional racism as black people murdering unarmed or cops murdering unarmed black people, right? But there's indigenous people institutional racism, right? And it's not centered nearly enough. I'm preaching to the choir, right? So can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like? Share the experience of what institutional racism looks like in the 30th district, let's say.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, first of all, institutional racism are ways that our founding documents or our institutions still uphold racist policies that disproportionately impact some people in the community. And you see this in a variety of ways. And right now, for me, the things that stand out the most about our current elected officials in this area is honestly their silence on Black Lives Matter. And it comes back to just understanding these issues and what's reality and what's not, but more specifically, you look at things like the criminal justice system and how many people of color are persecuted compared to, or, put into prison for the same kind of charges where white people are not. And, now with legalization of marijuana, what are these programs really doing? Are they helping people, or are we just being punitive? That's targeting these communities as well. And then if you go into education, education specifically with tribal communities has been nothing but colonialism. And people don't know, as a Native person, you have to traumatize yourself and you have to seek out this history and you have to learn these hard truths about why historical trauma is real. And you have to really educate yourself. And this public education I got here, it's getting better. And there are things like Senate Bill 13 that was passed in Oregon, a tribal curriculum bill. There was a House bill passed in 2017 to create ethnic studies standards. Those are very important aspects of my campaign that I want to support. But right now they don't exist. And so when I talk about institutional racism, it is public education systems that aren't intentionally teaching about institutional racism because it exists. And when you're not being cognizant of it and you're not teaching everybody how to advocate for change or to even recognize it, that's institutional racism right there, upholding those norms, and with tribes, it's hard because boarding schools really were a huge disruption to our identities, and they were a huge part of kind of the cultural genocide that took place. And so when we're not teaching about that, or we're not intentionally healing or creating tribally led schools or having public funding for more options other than just this normal rote learning, standardized testing. And now, it's so obviously disproportionate with the distance learning. There's not even broadband on the entire reservation. There's no way that our students' needs are going to be met. And we just are like, and so it's those ways that our communities just continue to be left behind because we're not at the forefront of elected officials and what they're thinking, and they're not even acknowledging things like ICE and the dehumanization of our community members and our relatives and what these policies are doing. You look back at history, and actually, I know today's a big day because of the women's right to vote, but You look at when women got the right to vote and you compare it to when Native Americans got citizenship, they still didn't have the right to vote until the 1960s in every state in our own indigenous lands, you know? And so all of that is institutional racism. And it can't just be one thing or one policy or defunding police and creating wraparound services. It's all of those things, because only then is it going to be a more of a level playing field where we can move into a place of thriving instead of constantly having to play defense and hold the line and organize for people to get elected who buy into these things, but actually elect people who understand the 50-foot level, the 5,000-foot level, and have that tie to communities where they can't keep turning away. And, you know, the reason I really wanted to come onto this podcast too is because corporations, you know, I mean, we have to move away from the way these current systems exist. And capitalism is colonialism. And as long as we're not recognizing that and trying to move our systems away, it is always going to be people like me, communities that are slipping through the cracks. And at some point, you know, we have to acknowledge that my tribes lived here for time immemorial without currency, without money or chachaik. That is a complete social construct. There was no item that had an assigned value that created a made up hierarchy power structure of currency, and we had trade systems, you know, and our beliefs were your relationship with the earth, with animals, with each other is more important than anything else. And actually chachaik truly is, you know, going to make, instead of these circular life ways, these hierarchies. And that's all it's about, and it's going to be the end of us. And so those are part of that indigenous knowledge of coming in and maintaining, you know, our sustainable ways. Even though we live in poverty, even though we exist modern day, there was still these things passed to us in specific ways. And now it's my generation and the next generation's job to connect all of the privilege we have with technology, and even getting to get college educations, even getting these things that are barriers that our grandparents had that we don't have, you know, but we have to bring in their knowledge too and just reweave a different system.
Right. Yeah. Boy, there's so much in there. And, you know, I was researching you. I saw a clip of you from maybe 4 years ago or so at a council meeting, you know, making you know, a plea about some land that, you know, they were doing a study on a land, but it's, you know, they were kind of dismissing it, and you were making an argument about, you know, this is you know, tribal land type of thing. Can you talk about like these things? You know, I just want to give you a platform to talk about these things that maybe don't get a broader exposure. You know, I'll just turn it over to you. What within that, or like that, or, you know, when I was asking about institutional racism, I was specifically talking about institutional racism against Indigenous people in your district that maybe I wouldn't be privy to, or anybody watching might not have any eyes on.
Yeah. So I think, So I think, you know, in this district specifically, and for the Warm Springs tribe, after being on the tribal council and really looking at what we spend our resources on, what we spend our financial assets and our, you know, intellectual assets with our staff on, and a great majority of it is natural resources. We do a lot of land co-management, we do a lot of litigation, we spend a lot on attorneys trying to protect land. And again, holding the line, you know, a lot of times, and I just saw like a lot of people talking about this with the I think it was the Oklahoma land case where they ruled that the most of the state was actually tribal land, you know, of that a lot of times tribes are spending a lot of our money to force the government to uphold treaties. We're not even making progress. We're just upholding what was already promised, you know. And so here in the state of Oregon, it's really hard because Warm Springs is a sovereign nation, and so we're federal. You know, our treaty supersedes the state of Oregon. We're public law 280 exempt, and that law means that tribes are under state jurisdiction, but we are exempt from that. So we have a court system, and you know, there's some VAWA, some Violence Against Women Act, stuff that plays into it, but there's specific things broken down in the, like, I guess, the disruption of modern day government being forced on tribes with that mix of traditional leadership, you know. And some examples of that are our water infrastructure issue. Right now, we still have longhouses, we still gather first foods, we still have feasts, we still worship. There's multiple different tribes, so there's multiple religions and languages, and they are maintained, you know. And so Chush, or water, is the most sacred thing in all of our ceremonies. We start everything with it. We end everything with it. It's the center. It flows through us. That's like our understanding. And so as tribal leaders, You know, when we were faced with this water infrastructure issues we've been having for 3 years, where our pipes break and we don't have drinkable water. Yesterday, it was finally lifted after over a month here, but last year it was 3 months. It's going to keep happening, and they're temporary fixes. But because we're not a local government, we're not under state jurisdiction, and there's not really federal mechanisms for this kind of situation, we don't have a capital investment account built up to make the infrastructure repairs that we need to be making. And what we're being told by the state is to have access to the state funds, we need to meet their regulations, which means that we need to tax everybody for water and meter everybody's house. And so it's just hard because these small things of our spirituality are what we've been able to maintain. We fought for senior water rights. We don't lease them no matter how broke we are. We always maintain the flow so that the temperatures can stay down, so that the river health is the most important thing and the first foods in there. So we operate with integrity even when we're suffering. And so now we're in this situation where it's a choice of have drinkable water for our people or bend some more to this colonial way of looking and charge our people for the most sacred thing. That's institutional racism, you know. Other things too, you know, it's just back to the state and the land management of not having elected officials who are going to push land protection, who want to look at more privatization, all of that sort of stuff. I mean, Oregon, I think every Oregonian would agree that part of the reason we love this state is because of the natural resources. And so be protecting them and upholding them and thinking long term, not just continuing to see how we can extract them for a short-term economic gain, usually most of that leaving local communities and not really building any sort of sustainable life there, you know. And you know, one thing I like to talk about when you talk about institutional racism, sorry, one more thing, is the law cases, you know, because again, I wish people understood more about tribes and how much we spend on attorneys in our budgets, because we always have to be arguing law. If you've never heard of the Fishins from the Pacific Northwest, look them up. Tribal people have had to stand up and be put in jail and spend all of our resources just to have our treaty rights. And, you know, the Yakima chairman, Jode Gowdy, he's no longer the chairman, but he would always do these great talks about law. And he would cite the Johnson versus McClintock land case, and he would cite, you know, the Allotment Act. He would then all the way down to the papal bulls that are upheld by the church today. And he, a couple of years ago, he actually went to the Vatican to talk to the Pope. And those documents were the documents used originally in colonization that basically said anybody who was occupying land that wasn't Christian was too savage to actually occupy that land. And so you had the right to claim it. So those were literally the documents that they used to colonize America. And those have been cited in Johnson McClintock, in these land cases leading up to today. And so when you daisy chain those things back, as an Indigenous person, it hurts. But this is part of our existence, is you have to master these games and learn how to point out the, you know, genocide in them, and then how they're still impacting today. And oftentimes when you're met with elected officials who want to say racism isn't real, you're talking to a wall.
Yeah, boy, I'd love to get into a lot of that stuff with you, and I'm just going to invite you back to teach me more about some of these things and platform them. But as far as your race goes, so there's an incumbent who just was appointed, right? So he's only been there for a half a year or something like that, right? His name is Lynn Finley. And he was appointed by it was like a city councilor, or I don't know who the body was, but I looked and it's just a bunch of white faces, right? And I was wondering, how representative was that vote of the population of the district? I'm assuming not very, right? But moreover, can you talk about, what do you know about him as the incumbent? You said it's a conservative district, like he's probably the latest in a chain of Republican, terrible Republicans running that seat. What are you up against in terms of this incumbent?
Yeah. So Lynn Finley was appointed into the seat. He was a state representative out of Vail before that. And that really is a pattern in this district. Even my own state representative, he's now been elected, Daniel Bonham, but he was originally appointed in. And so just that alone, the fact that the positions that I've held, I had to win and fight for and be elected into them. And then a lot of our representatives just get appointed into these seats because it's a norm. Senate District 30, it is the largest. It is vastly Republican. I'm just going to tell you the numbers because we're very transparent about it, but it's 33,000 Republicans, 30,000 unaffiliated, 18,000 Democrats, and 1,000 independents is the numbers we have. And so, but the point is, we've had elected officials who, like Lynn Finley, have voted on party lines. And when Senator Cliff Bentz resigned to run for Congress for District 2, when he was the senator a couple years ago, I worked on the cap and trade bill in Oregon, and our tribe actually completed a carbon sequestration project through the California cap and trade market. And we were a very wealthy tribe because of timber. So this is not unique to us. It's very common in our whole district of this need for transition from timber economies or natural resources labor economies to more sustainable green economies. So the cap and trade bill, it was a bill proposed in Oregon originally to tax the 100 top polluters in the state of Oregon, and that was made up of corporations, utilities, and transportation. That money from them was going to go into 3 separate funds: a reinvestment fund from the corporations, a transportation, and a utility. The last 2 could only be used for transportation or utility. And so areas like Portland that were more advanced in those things weren't as excited, and everybody wanted a piece of the reinvestment. But Cliff Bentz actually acknowledged the need for public transportation and energy costs to go down and infrastructure and opportunities in our district. And I sat down and I listened to him on that work group about his amendments and his critiques of the bill, specifically the gas tax rebate, because, a lot of people were saying that the gas prices were going to go up. And we never know how things will go, but that's not what happened in California when their cap and trade passed. And so there was just a lot of misinformation being pushed out by special interest lobbyist groups. And a lot of people in our district are going to believe what our electeds are saying. And so the day that Senator Bentz led the walkouts was the day that I decided I was going to file, because it was absolutely against the best interest of the district. And I think it goes back to my understanding as a Native woman of how the power of influence can impact whole communities. Boarding school, there was literally a policy called "Kill the Indian, Save the Man," and so the power of teach and normalize in public education, the power of what you can influence and push as an elected official, we're going in the wrong direction, And so this was really about looking at Senator Finley and seeing that he really is not a leader. He's just another person who was in the right place at the right time with the right skin color and the right background. But people are suffering. And there's a lot of issues in our district. And I'm hoping that as we talk about the statistics and as I, put myself out there and people get to know me and my background and how I really was groomed and built by my tribe to do this kind of work, that they might understand that I truly want what's best for this district. I'm here. My son is going to be raised here. Our reservation is here. And I really want what's best. And so instead of being like, carbon markets, we're like, let's look at poverty. Let's look at childcare. Let's look at healthcare, because it's impacting every single one of us. And even though I can go on and on about tribal specific issues, I'm running because I know I'm the best for this position overall. Just the short session that they just did, there was a lot of bills. Broadband. Everybody knows broadband is horrible. Senator Finley voted against a bill to create a fund for rural broadband infrastructure that would tax urban cells. And his excuse was that not creating more taxes in a time of COVID, but that's just a cop-out, And so there's just no accountability, and there's nobody really talking about the real issues. And I've also been trained in politics. This isn't my first campaign. So strategically, I know what it's like to not be the one who's like got the little edge and you're going to for sure win. I'm the underdog. And this is a hard race and I'm going to have to fight really hard for it. But that makes it more important, because it's not just about getting elected and all the things that I will go in and champion. It's about normalizing people like me not just having a voice, but actually being able to lead and being taken seriously, because women of color have always been the backbones of these communities and we've never gotten the acknowledgement. And so it was just time to step up in a strong way and just challenge Senator Finley. And he's making it pretty easy.
Love all that. That's amazing. Yeah. There's, you were talking about the cap and trade thing. There was a line right on his website where he's basically bragging about it being dead. I read it. It's the bill would have created a climate policy office with the goal of reducing carbon emissions in Oregon by the year 2050. And he's boasting that he killed that HB 2020. That's insane, right? And like you said, it's the environment. You have deep roots there, obviously, as described, but the environment is important. It's critical to everybody there, right? You said there isn't anybody in Oregon you could talk to that wouldn't say the environment is top of their list, right, in terms of priorities, right? And here he is boasting on his website about, not even being a good steward, right? It's insanity. I wanted to ask you about, anything. Obviously you talked about broadband. That's reality has endorsed that with COVID, right? We have distance learning, exacerbated probably on the reservation, right? So that is kind of a universal issue in the district. How about like voter issues? Because that's in the news lately with a lot of voter suppression issues. I would imagine. You mentioned the makeup of the voter, right? I imagine you have to turn out quite a bit of vote, right? Being a deeply conservative district, how do you do that with a headwind of voter suppression? Just talk about that a little bit.
I mean, I think it's for us in Oregon, we've had mail-in voting for a long time, so it's a lot different. It is more of that conversation. I've been the chair of the Native Caucus in the Oregon Democratic Party for 3 years now, and our main issue is really that catch-22 of how do you engage with communities that our party has never truly represented or fought for. How do you tell them, hey, come vote for me, but also hold the party more accountable, but you need their voices and their participation in order to do that. So it really is more this issue of how do we rally people and how do we inspire hope and how do we get people to engage beyond the surface divide politics, and really talk about the issues. And so we're trying, and it goes back to the grassroots background that I have. We're just doing all of the outreach we can. It's a huge district. And, coming from a reservation, my campaign manager, her name is Amanda Squimfinyazi. She is a tribal member from Warm Springs as well. And she's younger than me. And it's her third campaign that she's working on, but she's the campaign manager. So it's a big deal. And we understand the importance of one or two organizers in a small town. And so that's really our strategy. Originally, I just was going to go through the district and talk to people because, my dad, he's a full-blooded Native, and he was a logger when I was growing up. He went and cut wood and sold it and took me with him every day when I was a baby until I went to, Head Start. And so my background really is one that I think a lot of even Republicans can relate to, of the way that my relationship in this district are and what I want for the future. Like things like I'm a gun owner. I obviously believe in gun control, but as a tribal thing in my identity, we hunt, we fish. That's part of our tradition, so sometimes it's hard when people are showing up to these protests with their guns, talking about their right. And, I want to show up with mine and be like, guess what? We agree on this thing. Guess government oversight. Let's talk about it. Because as a tribal person, but you know what? We need to also call it the fact that you're here to dominate us. And you're here to intimidate us with these guns. And it's not really about your rights, because why are you uncomfortable that I'm here with my gun if it's really about my right to have a gun, And I know I can't do that because whatever, but because I'm afraid that, I'll get shot by police or something for real. But it's that's who I am. This is really who I am. And this was my background. And so I think when I can sit down with people, and I have, when I was on tribal council, we had to work with a lot of Republicans. And this is what leadership is. It's relatability. It's building, strong relationships so you actually can represent people. It's sitting down and being able to have conversations when there's a lot of misinformation being spread. You go look at Senator Finley's fundraising and you look at mine. All of my fundraising is individual small donations. His is corporations. Of course, he's outspending me, but it means a lot to me who the people are choosing at this point. And he's got, hundreds of years of colonization and normalizing white men as leaders and people like me not on his side. But I'm hoping, we'll flip this seat. It'll be a huge deal. I know, looking at some of the other seats that are in the Senate, the Democrats are going to get the other 2 seats we need for the 2/3 majority to stop the walkouts from happening. So he can brag all he wants, but this bill is going to come back and other bills are going to come back. And hopefully I'm that 3rd seat, just solidifying, that supermajority in the Senate.
Right on. Yeah. So this is, so the Oregon State House is on the precipice of potentially flipping, right? So am I right about that? Yeah.
We have the majority, but we need 2/3 to have quorum. And so that's why the Republicans are able to walk out. So we need two more
Gotcha.
seats in the Senate to have the supermajority so that they can no longer walk.
Yeah, all the more reason to get behind Carina, because if the seat is in jeopardy, they can have infinite money come up behind him, right? Behind Finley, right? So, Carina, like you just said, you don't take any super PAC money, you don't take any PAC money. It's all small dollar donations. So grassroots, people driven, right? The reason I'm doing a lot of these episodes, Bernie lost, Charles Booker lost. That was like a gut punch, right? He so could have won, right? If he had more runway and whatever. And there are other races that are significant that matter that, 5, 10, 20 bucks, $100 could make a huge difference in, right? This race is a couple thousand votes, right? It's inspiring, voter turnout. It's potentially drawing some of the other side, right? It's super winnable. So, and just to compliment you a little bit, like, you look at politicians. We all know this, right? We look at politicians. You see, the ones that are programmed by consultants. They say the same rote language and they're robotic. And then you see a passionate person whose livelihood, whose heritage is based on this advocacy. I couldn't imagine having a better fighter in the seat than Carina, right? I'm going to move to your district just so I can vote for you. In fact, that's how motivated I am. But, I guess let me just pull up your district one more time and sort of the slide I made of you and see if there's anything else you want to kind of touch on. I like to give people the opportunity to brag on their district. So, this is your home. Just take a few minutes to brag on Oregon 30. What makes it great? What makes it special for you?
I think it's a huge district. It's very diverse. There's a lot of potential for amazing growth in it. And honestly, we do have a big land base. And so the potential for one of our electeds to go in and pass some big things in their freshman term, it would make us look great. It would be wonderful for us to get a voice in the legislature that's strong for rural Oregon. There are specific things like sometimes I do struggle with the party systems as a Native person when I look at some of the things done to tribes. And so I understand the unaffiliated voters of our district and kind of these limited tests and how if we had a strong advocate for some of these things in rural Oregon, specifically like the way we fund in the state by population as opposed to by miles, and having a leader who would go in and say, having strong roots in rural communities is a part of our heritage as rural Democrats. And that means you need to give us support for all of these services. Right now, I live in a childcare desert. There's literally not a place in this community of Warm Springs that takes 3 years or younger. That shouldn't be happening to anybody. It's not a matter of, oh, I don't have the choice I want. It's literally there is nothing out here. And so just having somebody who goes in and recognizes those things, there's a lot of families, there's a lot of people, ready to change out here, and I'm excited for it.
Right on. So the election is November 3rd.
We looked at the cap and trade testimony. Sorry.
Yeah.
So let me turn this up.
Go for it.
We went and looked at some of the testimony, and there wasn't actually as much opposition to the carbon markets as we thought. And so that's when I think about renewable energy and my background with energy. The potential for what we can do out here because of the smaller populations and baseloads, it's exciting, I guess. I just wanted to elaborate on the potential for just only if somebody gets elected who will push these things, but it could be, a district that would lead the way in the nation for the kind of things we could do for renewable energy and things like that.
Yeah, if I can be so bold as to summarize that, you would be a leader for expansion and growth and development rather than a leader of exploitation, which is the current incumbent.
Yes.
Right. Just to summarize that, if I may be so bold. Yeah. So any other issues that you kind of want to hit on? I'd love to have you back to talk more about some of the tribal specific issues, because those don't get enough voice, and I think you're incredible on that front. So I'd love to have you talk about that. Once you're in office, let's say. Any other issues that are important to you that you want to raise?
I guess I'll just say, I just want to let people know that I do need support, so if you are watching this and you feel like you would like to, please visit my website, carinamiller.com. I do have two younger tribal members on staff right now, and this campaign is also about capacity building. So if you make donations to the campaign, it's to get me in this seat, but it's also about power building within this district and creating other young BIPOC leaders and people to replace me quickly. And then also, I guess I just want to plug education. I know we talk about a lot of the things that we can do right now, policy-wise, to deal with systemic racism, but I always come back to education. And if elected, I would love to be on the Education Committee and the Ways and Means, specifically to continue work on the Ethnic Studies Bill. So I hope people across the nation are watching, because when I say I want to be a leader, not just in this district, but in the nation, as far as carbon markets go, and as far as creating ethnic studies curriculum from kindergarten through 12th grade across the state. Ethnic studies, people, please learn about it, because tribal curriculum, all these things are good, but until we can learn to look at systems through different lenses and dismantle them and understand what social construction is, we're going to have a hard time continuing to authentically relationship build. For me, I always want to acknowledge that I'm a Native person. I'm an Indigenous woman, yes, but I don't know everything, and I'm still learning about every other community. And so the long term, we need to start thinking long term, how do we really change our societies? And to me, education is how. And so we have to put a lot of focus on that and know that those reforms are coming. Otherwise, yeah, I thank you for having me on. I will also just plug that, we have all social media. It's Carina for Oregon, CARINAFOR Oregon, Facebook, and I have a TikTok, and on Instagram it's Carina, the number 4 Oregon. So come follow and share all my stuff and just help get the word out, because we are trying to inspire people and we're trying to flip this seat.
Right on. Yeah, so it's carinamiller.com is your website. And I was sort of scrolling through. You have a lot of amazing endorsements, a lot of your local representatives and tribal representatives and Future Generations PAC, and a lot of great organizations are endorsing you. Obviously you're uncorrupted, unbought, a sincere advocate for the people, good actor. The most important thing on your website, of course, is this donate here button. So if you go to Carina's website, throw her a couple of bucks. Every little bit helps on these grassroots campaigns, especially if you're going up against, fossil fuel money or whatever, whatever the Republican incumbent's taking. I'm sure he's taking every penny he can get outside the district. So carinamiller.com. The election is on November 3rd. I'd love to have you back on as the date nears if you want. Any chance of a debate with Mr. Finley?
I would love it. We are going to be challenging him and reaching out. I did challenge him to a dance competition. No response.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, that's another way that people can get involved, right? So they can campaign for you. I'm assuming you have a phone banking mechanism, yes, a texting campaign, but you can also call the incumbent and demand a debate. That never hurts, yeah, right? So awesome, Carina. Yeah, so thank you for all your work, and thank you for running, and thank you for raising all these issues. I think candidates like you are absolute amazing, right? If we had, people like you in offices everywhere, we'd be blessed. So I'd love to have you back, and thanks for taking the time to chat with me about your history, your experience, why you're awesome for this position, why people should vote for you, and I look forward to celebrating your victory on November 3rd.
All right, thank you for having me.
Right on. Thank you.